Today, I'm going to be responding to some common critiques of the homeschool lifestyle. Hi, I am Rachel from 7 in All. I am a second-generation homeschooler, and today I really wanted to talk about how I would answer and how I think about and respond to some of the very common critiques, questions, and criticisms of the homeschooling lifestyle. I asked a bunch of you on Instagram to share some of your real-life experience with homeschool criticism, and a lot of you did say that really, for the most part, you don't get so much outright criticism as a lot of questions. And I very much understand that this odd lifestyle of homeschool isn't something that every person out there understands. It is a little weird, and so there are questions about it. I don't think that when we get questions about our lifestyle that we should immediately put up the walls, be on the offense, be on the defense for homeschool, but that we should kind of listen to the questions and be willing to have the conversation. And that's how I wanted to respond to these criticisms today. Not so much to just dismiss them offhand with homeschool is the best for every person ever. But instead to really think about can homeschoolers learn anything from these questions and from these criticisms? Is there anything that we should take to heart from these? From some of them more than maybe from others. So let's get started. Now the first question or objection to homeschool is, but how will your kids have any friends? And I find this to be a very understandable objection because to develop really strong, lifelong friendships, it takes typically a lot of time and a lot of exposure. And for most kids, the most obvious and easiest way that they make friends is with the kids that they're going to school with every day for years, for the rest of their life. This is the reason that many kids really struggle when their families make big moves, is because you're not only moving them away from their home, but you're moving them away from their school where all their friends are. Because their friends are tied into where you live and who you're doing life with. And so I think that this is a very reasonable question to ask. How will your kids make friends? And I think that homeschoolers should be asking themselves this question. How will your kids make friends? Because when you aren't going to school with the same kids every day for years, you're probably going to have to be a little bit more intentional about finding friends. And I want to say it is possible to make friends. I do think it's going to take extra intentionality, and I think it's going to take the decision to be a certain type of family. What I saw in my family's home growing up is that my parents decided very early on that they were going to be the home that anyone else was welcome at. So when I was growing up, we could always have our friends over. It was never like, oh, you're having friends over too much. No, our friends were welcome to be over. Our friends were welcome to eat at our house, to play, to read books. They did eventually kick them out to go home at night. But my parents were very, very welcoming. And so our friends, we almost never had homeschooled friends growing up. Homeschool is, we got to remember, a little bit rare. And so most of our friends were public schooled. Our friends were from the other kids that lived in our neighborhood, or largely our friends were from church, because we would go to church. We would be involved in the same church, Sunday schools or youth groups, or different activities, so we'd had a chance to see all those kids many times at that event. Our families would get together and do many things. So we were involved in certain things that did allow us to make friends. In high school, I also did drama club, and I made friends through that. Also, siblings can be friends. I come from a really big family, so we had each other to play with all the time. Smaller homeschool families have a different situation, and they are going to have to be even more intentional because they don't have 7 kids to play with each other and keep each other busy all the time. So I think this is a question that should be heard, and it should be heard in a sense of what are you going to do about that deep need for friendship? Because I think the deep need to be known and to really have consistent friends in your life, consistent friends are precious. It shouldn't be ignored, and it shouldn't be something we ignore for our kids. Now, a kind of related question, another objection, is the famous socialization one that all the homeschoolers super hate. But how will your kids be socialized? And in this conversation, I'm going to take the definition of socialization as in learning the common rules of society, learning how to behave in a community and in a society. Basic things like, how do you wait in line? Do you just walk up to the front of the line and put yourself first? No, you wait in the line in your spot, you don't cut, like all these many things. And here I would say, well, how do kids learn socialization in school? I think there's two ways. There's explicitly, there's the teacher is teaching procedures, the teacher is teaching community rules. There's a lot of policies that they have to follow. So there's explicit teaching of this is what you should do to live in community, live in society. And then there's also the implicit teaching. Kids are learning from experience. They're learning that if they wear ugly clothes, then other kids are going to make fun of them. And so they learn to, dress more normally. Or if you're rebellious, you just still wear whatever you want and you don't care what they think. Kids are learning from the experience of just being around other kids, which some might argue that other kids that are just as immature as you are not necessarily the best people to teach you how to behave in society, and many homeschoolers do. But I would say that both explicit and implicit learning of socialization skills can definitely happen for homeschoolers. It takes intention. Parents, there's nothing stopping parents from teaching basic manners, basic rules for how do you go to the post office? How do you go to the grocery store? How do you talk to somebody at church? How do you talk to a stranger? Parents can teach all these rules, and parents can choose to give their kids experiences which will help them to be able to interact with society. Parents can give their kids experience around other kids, around other adults, and then help their kids process those experiences and learn all these necessary skills for being involved in society. They can help them learn how to have a conversation, how to make a phone call, these skills that are needed. Just because you can learn it in school doesn't mean only school can teach it. Now the next objection, but you are not a qualified teacher, so how could you teach your children? Again, I have a couple thoughts on this. One, if you talk to many qualified teachers, people who have education degrees, people who have gone through the teacher tests to be certified by their state, I think that many of them will tell you that the minute that they walked out with their degree or passed their tests, they were really not actually ready for teaching and the demands of teaching, handling a classroom and everything. And the most valuable experiences they got were from years on the job. I think if you talk to most first-year teachers, they will definitely feel like that. I have two sisters with education degrees. They would both tell you the same thing. That just because you have that degree, it doesn't mean that you can actually do every single element of the job. You learn so much from experience, and the same is true of so many fields. Another thing to point out, teaching children, it's not actually the same as like being a pharmacist. Like you could say, how can you go and be a pharmacist? You don't know anything about medicine. And I would say, well, yes, I could not walk into a pharmacy and be like, yes, I'm going to mix up medicines and I'm going to check the doctor's prescriptions and make sure everything makes sense. I don't know anything about that field. It's a very specialized field with specialized information. I can't walk into being a computer programmer when I don't know any coding languages. There are a lot of jobs that require very specialized information, specialized knowledge. And if you don't have it, you can't do that job. Teaching is not like that. Like when you're homeschooling and you're starting with preschoolers, you gotta know how to read a book. You gotta know how to learn. You gotta know how to do your research and pick out a curriculum. That's pretty much what you gotta know. You might wanna know how to pick up a book on early childhood development. It's not actually a super specialized job. It's not the proverbial rocket science to teach. Also, I should point out, and I feel like many teachers know this, I'm not sure how many people outside of teaching know this, a lot of teachers are not actually certified teachers. They don't have education degrees. Many teachers are subject teachers, especially in the high school field. People with biology degrees are teaching biology. People with Spanish degrees are teaching Spanish. So not every even teacher has an education degree. So why are we getting so caught up in a certificate or an education degree to be able to do something? I do think that homeschool moms should be doing continuing education. They should be doing their due diligence of finding out what skills they might need to grow in and how they can grow as they teach their kids. But the great thing is you're usually starting from younger kids. That's how kids start out. They're young and then they grow older, and you can grow with them, and you grow with years of experience. Just like any first-year teacher eventually becomes an 8-year teacher or a 10-year teacher, and they have a lot of experience and a lot of skills by that point. but they didn't start out with those skills. So that's my thoughts on that objection to homeschool. Another objection is, but how will your kids have access to the kind of equipment that a real school will have? They won't have access to specialized science equipment for science experiments. They won't have access to the super expensive sports and gymnastics equipment that schools have. And here I would say that's extremely legitimate. The average homeschooling family cannot own super expensive educational equipment. And so that can make it hard to do some things that you could do in a science lab, that you could do in a school that had the very expensive equipment that a school can have. Now, is it possible to do high school lab science at home? I would say that it is. I did. You can buy experiment supply boxes, you can buy a microscope, you can buy a telescope. It's going to take some extra commitment, it's going to take some extra cost. You can get certain kinds of equipment. It is possible. It might be expensive, but it's possible. And it's also good to be aware that not everybody probably needs the same amount of lab experience. If your child is going into a scientific research field, you are going to want to put extra effort in getting them the opportunity to have this lab experience that they will want, that can help build them up for success later. So maybe you're going to get them private classes. Maybe you're going to get them into a community college where they can have lab classes. They can do that in high school. There are opportunities. You'll have to probably do extra work to try to seek them out. But not every kid is going to need access to all of the equipment that a school has to offer. Maybe if you have a kid who's super skilled and really wants to go far in sports, you're going to have to look for opportunities beyond just the public school system to support them in that. If you have a kid who is going to go far in music, you're going to have to look for opportunities. Again, you can find it, but it does take extra work on behalf of the homeschool family because yes, the average house is not equipped with specialized learning equipment for these types of disciplines that require extra equipment. So yeah, it's not as easy. It's maybe not as cheap as if you could just get it through the school system. But I wouldn't let that necessarily stop you, and I wouldn't let that make you think that, oh, my child can't pursue this field. I would pursue it. I would. But know that there's probably going to be extra work and extra cost, and hopefully that is worth it. Another objection to homeschool says it's not good for kids to be sheltered, to be in a bubble, to be controlled by their parents. They will never learn to live in the real world and in a diverse community. And this is where I think my answer kind of has two major parts. One, is it really that bad to shelter a young child? I mean, we don't show our 3-year-olds every movie out there. There's some movies I really, really like. There's some movies I see great beauty in. I'm still not going to show them to my 3-year-old or 4-year-old. They're not at a maturity level. They're not old enough. They're not at a place where their heart can understand the story, understand the beauty of it, and also handle the ugliness of it. I'm not going to show my small children Schindler's List, you know? We do shelter young children from things for a reason. And is it actually super safe, super helpful for their development for 3-year-olds or 4-year-olds or 5-year-olds to spend most of their week outside of their own safe space, their own bubble of their home, their own family? Is that actually the most helpful thing for them, to be unsheltered at that stage? I would ask that question. I personally lean more toward no. I don't think that that's the time that we need to be exposing them to everything. Now, on the other hand, I don't believe that kids need to be sheltered forever. I think, there's a growth process. As they grow in maturity, they grow in their ability to handle tough and difficult situations. And I do think that diverse community is extremely important. And sometimes I think homeschoolers can be a little, I'm saying misguided. I feel like that sounds a little bit too harsh, but that's the only word I can think of right now. A little bit misguided in overly thinking, I want to find like-minded community for my kids. I want to find other homeschoolers for them to play with. I want other people that totally share our values and are like us. And I'm kind of like, yes, it's really nice to have friends that think like you. It's nice, it's fun, it's comfortable. But it's incredibly valuable to have friends whose experiences of life are almost nothing like yours. And as your kids grow, It can be hard to find a diverse community. It can be. We live in a city, so it's easier for us. We live in a very multicultural environment. We live in an environment where most people don't share the religion that we practice as a family. So most of our community is actually not very much like us. They're still so worth knowing. They add so much to our lives. We can learn so much from them. I'm glad that my kids are getting to grow up with a very diverse community. They are getting to be exposed to things that aren't in our home. They're getting to be exposed to a lot. As they grow, they're not sheltered necessarily by being homeschooled, but they are able to have an opportunity that's so much bigger. Actually, when I was growing up homeschooled, we kind of saw that the kids who went to a specific school, we thought that they were in a bubble because these teenagers, these kids, their lives were so wrapped up in school that it seemed like they almost weren't hardly aware of what was going on outside of their school community because it was just the school community. Whereas for us homeschoolers, we didn't have a school to be wrapped up in, so we ran wild in the community. We knew what was going on. We felt like we were really a part of it versus tied up in the bubble of school. So that's some thoughts on the shelter and bubble issue. The next big objection is that homeschool kids will never learn to have executive functioning skills without all the things you get in school, like deadlines and grades. And here's what I could say, if you want to and if you find it helpful, you can use deadlines in homeschool and you can even use grades in homeschool. We have at times, we haven't used deadlines all that much. Remember, different kids have a different level of need for learning executive functioning skills. Some kids are going to need a lot of work on building these skills. Other kids will need almost no work at all. I am weird, but I was kind of born with executive functioning skills. I have been planning, organizing, scheduling, and keeping my family running since a very young age. So that's something that came very naturally to me. I've never needed a deadline in my life because I always get things done before any deadline could be set. Some people are wired like that. Other kids are going to really need to work intentionally on it. Again, with homeschool, you can adapt to the kid who needs the grades, the kids who needs the deadlines to be able to grow in their executive functioning skills. You can give them that. The kid who doesn't need it, you don't have to put that on them. So homeschool is so adaptable. Just because it's not trendy to have deadlines and grades in homeschool doesn't mean you can't use them if you find that to be a useful tool. That's what I would say to that. Next. Homeschoolers never learn how to learn in their non-preferred way because their education is so personalized. This is the last objection I'm going to cover for today. I think it's a really interesting one worth talking about. So in homeschool, we talk a lot about figuring out our children's preferred learning style, figuring out what curriculum really works for them. And I do think that it's important to have an element of challenging your child as they grow to learn in ways that don't come as naturally to them. However, should the non-preferred learning style be the primary learning style from very, very early on in a child's relationship with learning? Is that going to be the best way? Or should we give them small doses, challenging them to get outside their comfort zone with learning, small doses that keep practicing in this non-preferred learning style as they grow so that they can grow they don't have to be catered to, they can learn, they realize that they can do hard things and they can learn in different ways even if they don't like that way. I actually think it should be that second way, that we should give them small doses and small opportunities, but that it shouldn't be, if the kids need to learn in their non-preferred learning style, we should just drop them into school and let them learn everything in their non-preferred learning style. I'll give you a quick example. I hate auditory style learning. That is my least preferred learning style. Having to sit down and listen to a teacher is very hard for me. I would just hand me a book. Let me teach it to myself. I can read, I can visually learn it, I can figure things out myself, but having to sit down and listen to someone is very hard because my brain works very fast and people talk very slowly. So to have to slow down enough to listen to them can be hard because they're talking so slowly that I have to think about other things so that I don't get bored. This is how my brain is wired. That is also how most classes are run. I have learned to learn that way. I have learned strategies that help me learn that way. One strategy is that I take notes, and I just don't take shorthand notes. I pretty much write down word for word what they say, sometimes with added commentary. That's what helps me to pay attention. I learned that strategy when I went to college. I was able to handle lecture style classes very well, but it wasn't something that I started having to be in lecture style classes at a super young age. I was able to handle it when I was 17. No problem. I knew strategies like note-taking that really, really helped me. Writing down the words, adding my own commentary, organizing them as I'm writing. That helped me, but I had the time needed to grow in being able to learn in this type of style. So those are my Rachel style responses to some of these objections. I would love to hear from you. Leave me in the comments. What are some of your thoughts or reflections as you hear these type of questions and objections to the homeschool lifestyle? What would you say? What value do you find in listening to the questions? And where do you think that sometimes the way that we are thinking is just different? We're just seeing the same problem from a different angle. Yeah, let me know your comments. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and please do subscribe to my channel if you want to have more nerdy homeschool conversations. Bye!